Does this ring a bell? No? How about this one? If both sounds ring a bell to you, trust me, you're a certified fossil. If you're still confused, no worries. What you just heard are the theme songs to a very popular Kenyan stand-up comedy platform, Churchill Show. Stick around and in a few, I'll tell you an observation I made about the show. With that being said, welcome to the very first episode of the RAWPOD with me, Renee Were. Let's get real and raw. So I'll just put it out there. I no longer find Churchill Show funny. Yeah, I said what I said, and I have a feeling I'm not the only one. Maybe it's because I've probably outgrown the show, which means I'm no longer the target audience, or because I came to a realization. Earlier on, I had mentioned that I observed something about the show. My observation is that most of the jokes made on Churchill fall into 3 categories: tribe, gender, and social class. How did I come to this conclusion? So allow me to just tell you a little story. Some time back, my friend and I were at school and we were working on a project, and he told me about this time when he was going home and the matatu he was in was playing Churchill Show episodes. The rest of the passengers seemed so amused by what they were watching, and he wasn't. At some point, he even felt out of place because everyone around him is literally laughing and he's there confused as to what they find funny. As he was telling me this, I had my eureka moment. And I was just like, you know what? Come to think of it, Churchill Show has actually lost its source. And looking back to when I used to actively watch the show, I realized that most of the comedians would rarely miss a joke on the 3 areas I mentioned previously. Then, as part of my research, I went back and watched several episodes of Churchill Show from the very first season, and I noticed a pattern that confirmed my exact thoughts. But before we dive into that, let's go back to where Churchill Show began. Way back in 2008, comedian Daniel Dambuki, aka Churchill, created Churchill Live, which up until March of this year aired on NTV, but now it's currently airing on TV47. The initial format was very simple. Churchill was the host and he would have celebrity guests on the show. He had a segment where he'd play a short comedy skit. He also had a segment known as Toto's Corner, which was a vox pop where he would ask kids about, their opinions on different issues. Fun fact, I actually appeared in an episode of Toto's Corner in the very first season. But I'm not going to tell you which episode it is, so you just have to go back and rewatch all the episodes like I did, and maybe you might spot me somewhere. So comment whether Churchill came to your primary school. And for those who don't know, back in the day, it was actually a huge deal if Churchill came to your primary school. And I remember that day when we heard he was coming, we were also excited that we were going to be on TV. I mean, here was this guy who we watched on TV actually giving a damn about us and, coming to see us, and we also get to be on TV. Hey, my mind was blown. And yeah, those were fun days. Churchill used to be the only comedian on stage, but after a few episodes, guest comedians started making appearances. Churchill Live later rebranded to Churchill Show in its 3rd season, and by then, it had grown to the extent of introducing another platform called Churchill Raw for upcoming comedians. And as of today, the show has spanned 10 successful seasons with several editions done across the country. The goal of the show was always about celebrating being Kenyan. In fact, Churchill himself said this during the very first episode of the show, and I quote, "Churchill Show is about celebrating the Kenyan in us and laughing at the little things that we take for granted but make us unique as Kenya." End of quote. So, what changed? Most comics feed prejudice and fear and blinkered vision but the best ones illuminate them. Comedy is medicine, not colored sweets to rot the teeth with. This is from a play by Trevor Griffiths called Comedians, and I feel that it sums up basically everything that I want to talk about. No one is saying that you can't joke about tribe, gender, or social class. These are things that are part of the Kenyan experience. The problem is the stereotypes attached to these jokes and the constant emphasis on said stereotypes. A stereotype can simply be defined as a fixed or oversimplified idea of something, someone, or a group of people. Let's start with tribe. I think you'll agree with me when I say that this is the most common stereotype peddled by Churchill Show. Of course, our ethnic diversity is one of the markers of our national identity, and it's important to recognize this. It's also worth celebrating, but I don't think stereotyping is the way to do it. If it's not jokes about Kikuyus being materialistic cons who are also business savvy, then it's jokes about Kambas dabbling in witchcraft. And we also have the Luos who are stereotyped as rich, extravagant, aggressive, and arrogant. Then we have the Luyas who are gluttonous, Kalenjins who have no personalities apart from being cops and athletes, and the Maasai who are illiterate. Coming up next, we have the hot-tempered and violent Merus, followed by the Kisis who are angry and loud, courtesy of Paul Wakimani. Not forgetting, of course, the Somali who are terrorists. Last but not least, we have the lazy Costarians. These are just some of the common tribal stereotypes I came across. I would have given examples, but tungeishi hapa, the jokes are so many. Feel free to comment on any other you feel that I may have left out. One thing I noted though is that not all comedians took part in the stereotyping. The late comedian, aka or Ayea, is one of the few who joked about normal everyday things. The guy once joked about types of rain, and it was actually a good joke. In fact, he rarely made stereotypical jokes centered on the three categories. The late Njengam Swahili and Teacher Wanjiko are also examples of comedians whose jokes don't necessarily have tribal stereotypes as the punchline. But remember, these comedians are only exceptions and not the rule. When it comes to the social class category, jokes in Churchill take the comparative form of the upper class versus the lower class, commonly referred to in the show as Islando versus Mababi. Islando to mean Eastlands, which is a typically lower class area, and Mababi to refer to those who live in the upper class areas of Nairobi. And it's interesting that the lower class is almost always the butt of the joke. So, the first comparison I found is parenting. There's a running gag of upper class parents being more loving and attentive than parents of the lower class areas who are presented as neglectful and harsh. There's this joke Sleepy David once made about kidnapping kids from Runda versus Eastlands, specifically Kayole, which is an estate found in Eastlands. The Runda parents were more caring and concerned about the kid, while the Kayole parents were willing to sell their child to the kidnapper. Then there's Butita, who joked about a child from an upper-class family getting lost for 10 minutes and the parents are immediately concerned, versus a child from a lower-class family getting lost and showing up after 2 days. Finally, there's Njoro, who constantly compared parents in Karen to his harsh and stingy dad in Kiambu. Now, I know Kiambu is nowhere near Eastlands, but it still fits the comparison. The second kind of comparison is kids from upper class families being more well-spoken than those from the lower class who mostly speak Sheng. Then the last type of comparison is women from upper class areas versus lower class areas. The upper class women are more ladylike and feminine compared to the Islando ones who display masculine behavior. In the 31st episode of season 3, Butita joked about the upper class women as being highly emotional, unlike ladies from Eastlands who only cry when cutting onions. And now, I'm not going to lie, when I first heard these jokes, Mimi nilicheka, I laughed, especially in Njoro's. And there was a time Njoro was actually one of my favorite comedians and the only reason that I tuned in every Sunday at 8 p.m. to sit down and watch Churchill. But looking back, I'm like, surely this isn't the case for everyone living in these areas. I know that the harsh living conditions in many parts of Eastlands make people live in survival mode, but always associating good traits with the rich doesn't help. And now, introducing the category you've all been waiting for. Give it up for the gender stereotype. Talk about saving the best for last. By the way, disclaimer, this isn't a gender war. Believe it or not, both men and women have been stereotyped in Churchill Show. But you don't need to be a rocket scientist to guess who received it more. Anyway, apart from obvious objectification, there are several running jokes of Kenyan women being materialistic. The same women are also emotionally unstable or highly emotional, lovers of gossip, and dumb or easy to manipulate. Then we have the never-ending jokes on women's clothing, hair, and makeup. But that's a story for another day. So, apart from watching Churchill Show episodes for research, I also used other helpful sources. I came across this journal article analyzing gender stereotyping in stand-up comedy. The researchers wanted to find out whether negative gender stereotypes against women are found in MC Jesse's jokes. If you're wondering who MC Jesse is, he hosted Churchill Raw and occasionally featured on Churchill Show as a co-host alongside Churchill. 32 jokes made in a span of 2 years from MC Jesse were analyzed. Out of the 32, 23 jokes were found to have gender stereotypes. 23! These jokes don't need to be made only in a span of 2 years. Sometimes you can find them in one episode, like episode 14 from season 3. The episode had back-to-back gender jokes by Chipukizi, Sleepy David, and Eric Omondi. Other times, you can find these jokes making up most of the comedian's content. Zedi is one of those comedians who has built her entire career on making jokes about gender stereotypes. Let's cross over to the men. There's a running gag of Kenyan men not being romantic and, of course, serial cheaters. A lot of jokes also focus on the men's financial status and emotions. Their emotions are mocked and they're only allowed to be emotional about certain things or serious things like football. Then there's the famous wanaume wako na umama joke that is used to mock or warn men against having feminine traits like bathing and moisturizing. The late Othwal once joked that men shouldn't bathe, saying that the only time men should come into contact with water is when they're taking soup. And you know what? I actually agree with him. In fact, real men shouldn't even take soup. They should take the water alongside the soup ingredients like painkillers. So now we've discussed Churchill Show and everything that makes it difficult to watch. If you're a fan of the show, you're probably pissed and expecting me to give you an alternative that I think is better. I mean, who am I to come after your favorite show? Well, my alternative is the Stand-Up Collective, and I'm going to tell you why. The Stand-Up Collective, formerly known as Saturday Night Comedy, was launched in 2017 by Doug Mutai, who is also a stand-up comedian. Think of it as Churchill Show, but without the annoying stage sound effects and stereotypes. I came across a 2019 Daily Nation article that helped me put things into perspective. According to Doug Mutai, the show addresses all subjects under the sun. I'm yet to attend one of the shows, but from the many clips I've seen online, the statement is true. The show does address different issues situationally, rather than attaching a stereotype to the character in the joke. E.g., if it's a joke about corruption, the comedian will just tell the joke and give the punchline. On the other hand, when it comes to Churchill, if a comedian gives a joke about corruption, they must attach a stereotype to the character in the joke. I kid you not, the comedian will likely give the character a Kikuyu accent because Kikuyus have a reputation of being quote-unquote corrupt or money-hungry, even though corrupt people are found in every tribe. In the same article, Mr. Mutai also says they want to give out the kind of comedy that makes people introspective about their daily experiences. I know sometimes you just want to laugh and forget about your problems. I mean, what's the use of comedy if it won't make you laugh, right? You came to laugh. Umekuja kucheka. You're not here to think about the rent that is due or that person who broke your heart and now you have to get back into the market. You're there to laugh. Good comedy makes you laugh, but it also leaves you with something to think about. That's why, in fact, I've seen so many conversations online and even in real life about Dave Chappelle and how he's the GOAT of comedy and one of the best to ever do it and whatnot. But do you know why people like Dave Chappelle are respected? Because Dave Chappelle addresses societal issues while leaving you in stitches. When Churchill Show comedians tell jokes, it comes across as mockery, especially of stereotypes. It makes you laugh, sure, but at the expense of another group. It's like having that one person in the group who thinks being mean is funny and insults you and then says, "Kwani hujui jokes?" You know, we've all come across that kind of person who will always have something sneaky to say, and then once you react, they backtrack and tell you that they were only joking. That's how a lot of comedians in Churchill Show operate. I also noticed that the comedians at Stand Up Collective happen to have accents. They do not make the accent the focus of their joke. Like Amandeep Jagde, who has an Indian accent, and David Masharia, who has an American accent. I bet that's how they speak in real life. A lot of Churchill Show comedians use accents as the main punchline. Some even use accents that aren't related to their ethnicity, like Dr. Ofweneke, who uses a Nigerian accent, yet he's a whole Luya. I get that we're a country of many tribes. I also get that personas are part of a comedian's performance, but in the end, the joke is what matters most. Just because you make jokes with an accent does not necessarily mean that you're funny. It's no doubt that Churchill Show has contributed greatly to the stand-up comedy scene in Kenya. The show has opened up doors for so many different people and opened us up to a lot of comedic talent. I mean, if Churchill went with the initial format of being the only comedian on stage, that show would have probably never grown to what it is right now. And that is something you cannot take away. Comedy is also very subjective. The show has its own target audience and demographic that enjoy it, and so does the stand-up collective. But that doesn't mean that Churchill Show can't be criticized. The show still peddles harmful stereotypes that, when repeated over time, influence how we perceive each other as Kenyans. You start to have shallow perceptions about the next person. And like I said before, you can joke about different things, but try to be more creative and less degrading, because that's what most stereotypes do. They degrade. With that being said, thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode and let's get real and raw right here on the RAWPOD with me, Renee Were.